We are in the middle week of what will be 5 weeks in this series entitled Love Big, where we talk about the core love relationships that define a Christian life. To begin today, I want you to look at 3 texts from the New Testament that all have the same fundamental message, or call attention to the same foundation stone of what it means to be church. First is from St. Paul. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Now, regarding your family or brotherly love for one another, we do not need to write to you, because it's obvious that you've been taught by God to love each other well. In fact, you love all God's family throughout Macedonia, that is northern Greece. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, keep loving more and more and more. There are a few things that are fascinating about that text. The first one is, apparently, in order to exercise family love toward one another in a church, you have to be taught it by God. It doesn't come natural to us, or at least not all of it. That's fascinating because the family instinct, the grouping instinct, the caring for your children instinct seems to be hardwired into Homo sapiens. But yet, for us to be family as a church, it's as if we need to learn something new, something additional. God has to teach us how to do this. And in the first century world of the New Testament church, these were the A+ students at it, apparently, because they were already doing it really, really well. But St. Paul says to them, nonetheless, I know you're doing great at this, just do it more, and do it more, and do it more. This is why Thomas Merton and Richard Rohr, among others, say that whatever else the Christian life is, it is a school of love, where over your years and your decades of following Jesus, you're supposed to be learning how to love other people better and more deeply, so that at age 70, you do it better than you did at age 30. In your 5th decade of following Jesus, you do it better than in your 1st decade of following Jesus. Second passage from a different author. This is the disciple Peter. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, now because you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth and have started having family or brotherly love for each other, keep on loving one another deeply, straight from the heart. Again, there's this notion that there's a prerequisite for exercising family love toward other Christian people in your church family. You've got to lay aside some of the things that perhaps your culture thinks about love, and you need to learn what God has to say about love. In the language of the verse, you have to be purified, and then you have to obey the truth. And as we learn from Jesus how to love each other well, we do it deeply. We are not those who cheapen the definition of what love is. Love is not merely sharing a joke in the narthex. It can include that, and here it absolutely must include that. It is not merely going to dinner with somebody. It is not merely being in the same Sunday school class with someone. No, to love deeply goes beyond that. Peter says it engages your heart, the very core of who you are, those things you hold dear, those positive and negative emotions that every single one of us carry around with us. Perhaps you've heard it said in church circles that, hey, I have to love you. I don't have to like you. I'm sorry, Peter begs to differ. We all have moments, sure, where we may not like each other in the heat of a conversation or a disagreement. But the goal ought to be that I get to the place where I love you and you and you deeply, straight out of the heart, Peter says. What a more transcendent goal for me to say to you, let's learn to appreciate and celebrate each other for who we are instead of merely putting up with each other. Last verse, again, coming back to St. Paul. This is from Romans chapter 12, verses 9 and the first half of verse 10. Your love must be authentic and genuine. Abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another with brotherly love. If I were to literally render that last sentence on the screen from the Greek, St. Paul uses the same root word twice in the same sentence, in noun form and in verb form. Literally, what verse 10 means is love each other like family with a family kind of love, in case you don't get the point. And it must be genuine and authentic. As Peter says in 1 Peter 1:22 previously, whatever our definition of love is, it must seem like it rises to the heights of that most prized word. Sometimes Christians cheapen love by substituting it for fellowship, because fellowship means sharing coffee after the service. That can be part of love, but that is not love, not in its entirety. Whatever the love is that we have for each other, it must be real, not fake, Paul says. So you see, in the first church, the earliest church, one of its uniquenesses is that it had a greatly expanded definition of what family is. And in fact, so often, it would provide family for those who didn't have it. If you ask church historians what was one of the reasons that the earliest church took off like a prairie fire all the way across the Roman Empire in 100 years or so, one of the things they will point to is this trait: that the earliest church had a calling card of greatly expanding our understanding of family. See, in their world, just like in ours, oftentimes when we think about family, we define it biologically. To whom are you related physiologically, genetically? And those are the people to whom you owe your greatest allegiance. Well, sure, I hope you're a loving mom, son, father, daughter. I hope. But for the Christian, it does not end there. We define family beyond mere biology. In their day, 2,000 years ago, so often family was defined by loving those of your own kind. If you were a Roman citizen in the ancient world, your chief allegiance was to other Romans. You were obligated by your citizenship vows to care for those who were Roman. And anybody who wasn't, you didn't have to. Another major group represented in the earliest church are the Jewish people from the rabbinic Judaism of the early ADs. They were the same way, a wholly insular group who cared a great deal for their own kind and not people who weren't. And this is not the way of the earliest church. They said, we are open to all comers. Welcome to all who would come here and be a part of us. Men and women, Jews and non-Jews, Greeks and Romans, even barbarians, Paul says in Colossians 3. You are welcome here with us. Moreover, you are not just welcome here, we want you to know your family. Oftentimes in the first century world, the people who did not have family were slaves. Just like in the checkered history of America about this subject, slaves were often ripped out of their families, placed in another home, in another city, in another locale, and they would never again see their biological family. And so the church in the ancient world said, is that you? We will be your family. Come be our brother. Come be our sister. In one of the most treasured little letters of the New Testament, Philemon, Paul sends a freed slave, Onesimus, back to Philemon. And Paul says in verse 16 of that letter, by the way, Philemon, don't treat him as a slave. You treat him instead, quote, as a beloved brother. These are revolutionary, world-changing ideas at the time. The New Testament scholar of our day, N.T. Wright, says, quote, the early Christians did their best to live as an extended family. They called each other brother and sister, and they really meant it. They lived and prayed and thought like that, children of the same Father, God Almighty, following the same older brother, Jesus, sharing goods and resources when the need arose. When they talked about love, the main way that they thought about it was like this, that they wanted to live as a single family, a mutually supporting community. The church must never forget this calling. The church is family. So how? How is it that we can cultivate a church that is family? Let's pivot because we don't have to guess. If you ever have a friend or yourself go to a licensed marriage and family therapist, I want to tell you what they look for and what they're listening for as you describe your family. Up on the screen are 8 of the 10 traits that define either a functional family or a dysfunctional family. And here's what I'm going to tell you. For those of you who have experienced dysfunctional church families in your life and have been perhaps deeply hurt by them, it's because they were functioning like a dysfunctional family. And if you and I want to be a healthy, vibrant, thriving church family, then we have to choose together the behaviors of a functional family. Let me go through these just briefly. The first trait has to do with communication. Is it clear or is it poor? Do people talk directly to each other or behind each other's backs? Do people use heightened negative emotions when they talk? When they talk, do they get angry? When they talk, do they demean? That's what dysfunctional families do. Whereas in a functional family, we talk clearly and openly about everything that needs to be known, even those things that to some may seem like they need to be secret. One of the worst things in the life of church are the truths or the facts that you don't know. Because for whatever reason, the church leadership chooses not to tell you. And let me go ahead and tell you why they choose not to tell you. Because they think you're going to freak out when they do. In a healthy church, we communicate clearly. Number 2, in a healthy family, a healthy church family in our case, we value individuality. We don't compare to other family members. In biological families, you experience this when you know, even if it's never said, that there's a favorite child, and you aren't him or her. Well, guess what? We do the same thing in church. Whereas St. Paul would tell us in Romans chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 12 that we're all different, and we should celebrate those differences. Instead, sometimes what we do is we compare people to other people. How about this? Let's make this commitment together. I am not going to expect you to be me. How about you don't expect me to be you? This is what a healthy family is like. Number 3, in a healthy family, you share power. There is great engagement about any decision that needs to be made. In an unhealthy family, there is a will to power. There is somebody who wants authority, and they are trying to take it away from everybody else. You know that you're in a situation like that when it feels like you're in a win-lose choice. And somebody is trying to win, and they are trying to make you or your friends or your side lose. Number 4, this has to do with the words you hear in the home. Is there purposeful encouragement, or is there excessive criticism? Do you know that across all nations, among adults, 50% of our language is negative, 30% is positive, 20% is neutral? You know what that means? In order for you and I to be a church family that is marked by positive words, we have to be intentional about it. Because our default is to be more critical than we are constructive. This is how St. Paul says that in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no evil talk come out of your mouth, but instead only what is good for building up, as there is need for it, so that your words may give grace to those who hear them. Next trait of a functional family: predictable character versus unpredictable encounters. Can we commit together that we will be the same person in every conversation with everybody we meet? Or do I have to worry that when you're with your friends, you're going to act a certain way or be negative together, but when you're in public, you're a totally different person? This is called integrity. In functional families, we prize integrity. In dysfunctional families, you often do not find it. In a functional family, I take personal responsibility for my emotional well-being. I don't make you responsible for it. As a pastor, let me go ahead and tell you this. My job is not to make you feel happy all the time. I am sorry if you thought that. I don't go out of my way to make you mad, but sometimes I've got to say things so that you can learn and we can grow together. But here's the beauty of it. I don't expect you to make me happy either. You know who's responsible for my happiness? There is only one person. It is not my wife, it is not my kids, and it is not you. It is me. In a healthy family, everybody takes responsibility for how they feel and for their own well-being. In a healthy family, we have appropriate expectations for each other as opposed to unrealistic. As a Christian, you know what some of the appropriate expectations we ought to have of one another are. Here's how St. Paul describes it in Colossians 3, verse 13. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you. So you too must forgive. You know what an appropriate expectation is for us to have as a functional, healthy church family? We are going to make mistakes toward each other. I was at a conference one time, and one of the breakout session leaders said that some of the best advice he ever got as a pastor was, every year, be sure you make a big mistake. To which somebody in the room raised their hand and went, no, I get fired if I make a big mistake. And yet St. Paul and the writers of Scripture would say, no, in order for us to be a functional church family, much forgiveness is required. Which assumes then, yeah, sometimes I'm going to say things you don't like, and I want you to tell me, and I'll apologize. Or sometimes I'm going to come off in a way that you may not like, and I'd like you to tell me so I can apologize. Community that does not require this level of grace is fake. You are not being true to yourself or to each other. A functional family has appropriate expectations. As a Christian, one of those is we should expect to have to forgive each other a lot. The last one, don't let me skip it, has to do with emotional engagement or intimacy. In a dysfunctional family, there is emotional superficiality. There is emotional hiddenness. That is, we can talk about lots of things, but you got to stay away from what's real, what's really going on in here. How I may feel broken today, how I may doubt today, how I may disagree with you today. No, we can't talk about that. That's off limits. Emotional intimacy is no. We connect as David and Jonathan did in the Old Testament, soul to soul. You know me openly, I know you openly. This may not be with everybody, it doesn't have to be. But do you have at least some people here with whom you can be intimate emotionally? This is what it means to be a functional family. KirkWood is no exception. Let me finish here. There was a wide-ranging study done in 2019 and 2020, published in 2021, about adult relationships by one of the leading Christian research groups in America. And the head of that research, Dave Kinnaman, would say that the results of this study completely upended his assumptions about what he'd find. Here are the two things he said that went against what he thought he'd find. Number one, Christian adults are as lonely as non-Christian adults in America. Half of Christian adults spend time at least several times a week feeling intensely lonely. A third of Christian adults in America feel intensely lonely at least several times a day. And we are no different than the non-Christian public in that regard. Here's the second thing that floored him. Do you know that as COVID hit, we actually got better at connecting with each other, not worse? You know why? Because we got more intentional about it. We no longer took each other for granted as we were there hunkered down in our homes. We thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to see people on Sunday morning. I'm not going to be able to be in person with my small group. I'm going to have to go out of my way to make relationships happen. And so over the first year of the pandemic, our connection with each other actually grew. Remember the name Michael Frost? He wrote the book that we read together last year entitled Surprise the World. In an article that I'm going to send to you in the Monday email tomorrow, entitled The Lonely Crowd, he writes this: I've lost count of the number of Christians who have told me that they either stopped attending church or left their church to join another one because they couldn't make any friends there. They report that church people were friendly enough. They were hospitable and welcoming. As one person told me, they're nice to you, but no one wants to become your friend. And it hurts when all that friendliness leads to only friendlessness. In the 1950s, there's a sociologist by the name of David Riersma who coined the term the lonely crowd, in part to describe a collective of people who live according to the same tradition and values, but they barely know or like each other. I fear that church is in danger of becoming just such a lonely crowd. KirkWood is a family. Many of you have experienced that. Let's hope and pray that more will experience that. And let's be willing to do what it takes to be a functional family for each other, not a dysfunctional one. I want to end today not by praying, but instead, I want you to hear from some attenders at KirkWood about how the KirkWood family has loved them well.
The KirkWood family has been here for me in a very difficult few years, probably 10 years ago or more. And in 2014, my father, who was a member here, passed away, and he brought me here. But this family took me and loved me and accepted me and allowed me to become a part of something I'd never been a part of before. I love this church family.
I guess my understanding of the love that the family here at KirkWood has shown me goes back to the beginning when we were wandering around in the woods out here looking for a place to start a church. One of our visions as we put together the plans for the congregation was to have a fellowship that would really grow and serve the community and share God's love around the area, not just within the fellowship, but reach out to all the surrounding areas. And I guess the blessing I feel is that this has come to pass. It's developed into an extremely warm, supportive congregation, and I feel that.
How has KirkWood shown me love? They've shown me unquestioning love over the years, during the celebration times, during the tough times, during loss of a loved one or a relative. And they've even showed me love when I've questioned my faith, never judging, always being there as a landing place. And I know that no matter what, they're going to be there.
Mike and I came here in the year 2007. We left a church, there was a lot of dissension, and it was so nice to come here and worship in peace. In a few months after we joined, Mike had heart issues. He had 4 bypasses. The KirkWood family brought us food and cards and called us and checked on us, and we really appreciate it. One last thing is I appreciate personally the opportunities that I have been given to serve KirkWood. It has been fun, and I really appreciate this church, and I appreciate God. Thank you.
The KirkWood family has loved me well for the last almost 35 years by giving us a place for Kim and I to raise a family, second and third sets of virtual grandparents, a place to make mistakes, a great place to grow, foster us, and given us a place to serve. And so I've felt loved in this context for quite a while, and really take delight in God's grace, in getting to know a lot of folks, seeing people come and go, and it's been home, and in the context of sharing grace together.
I would like to speak about a specific way in which this congregation has loved me. This past year, I've had the immense pleasure to be an intern here, and I was told to assemble a mentoring team, a group of 5 individuals who would help me all year long, and boy, did they help me. I would like to say their names: Cindy Williamson, Wilma Mitchell, Bob Craig, Kim and Charlie Reese. I can't say how grateful I am for your support, your love, your prayers. It's made a tremendous difference. And I thank you, because I think that speaks very well for our church, that you all were so willing to spend your time in upholding me through the year. So I thank you.
The way that the Kirkwood Church family has loved me well is by remembering me well. Our family is military. We got here around 2003, and our girls were baptized here, but unfortunately, like most military families, we had to leave. So we left in 2006. Throughout the entire time we were gone, didn't matter what church we were at, we'd get notes. We'd have people who would email and ask how we're doing. We'd hear things on the prayer list. No matter where we were, they remembered us. Didn't know if we'd ever be back here. Fast forward to 2015, and we were stationed back here. We came back to the church, and when we walked in, we had been here 9 years. People remembered us. They had loved us throughout, no matter what, remembered our family, the girls. And in the middle of the service, the preacher stopped and said, "I'm sorry, I just have to welcome a new family here," and had us stand up and said, "The Fisher family is in the house." And that's how we felt, like we were back at home and back loved and with the Kirkwood family. So thank you.
All right, how has the Kirkwood Church family loved us well? Well, as being 60 years old, it has been one of the best families that I've been associated with. We've been members since the late 90s, early 2000s. We've been on the peninsula since the middle 80s, and it wasn't until we came to Kirkwood that we felt like we were really at home. And that's just been an amazing experience. I don't know that I've fully figured out how Kirkwood has loved me well, and that's why I keep coming back every week.